Going to have a look at Ukraine now, because there's been obviously dreadful events there in the last week
Yeah, it's shocking.
in relation to deaths in Kiev and ballistic missiles that have been launched by Putin in his attempt to try and cow the Ukrainian people. They do seem to be hitting quite regularly now civilian buildings as well, although the Russians would claim that they're not intentionally targeting civilian buildings. But the major problem that President Zelensky was outlining the other day when this happened was that 28 Russian ballistic missiles had been fired at Kiev, and all of them had got through, unfortunately. And that's because they haven't got enough Patriot missiles to be able to take these things out. They've got sufficient protection to be able to take out the drones, but the ballistic missiles just move too fast and they can't bring them down without anything other than something similar to the Patriots. So I thought I'd have a look and see what the problems are and how they might be able to overcome those, or if they might be able to overcome them. So did you know that the Europeans are producing anti-ballistic missile?
I made the assumption, but there's not a lot talked about European Patriots, for want of a better expression. No.
Well, the Patriots, as we know, Trump has already used a hell of a lot of stock that the Americans have got in the Gulf, protecting allies in the Gulf. And he's walked back on the promise to allow the Ukrainians to produce their own. He was going to license them to produce Patriots within Ukraine, wasn't he? I don't know whether you saw that.
I did see that. Did he say why he'd walked back?
Why he'd walked back? He made some comments about it being very dangerous move to give other people the rights. It was a bit of waffle, really, at the end of the day. But he was suggesting that they couldn't just give anybody the right to have these Patriot missiles. So I'm not quite sure where that goes, because it's not 100% clear. But by the same token, it did sound as though he got cold feet in terms of. Now, whether that's anything to do with the conversations that he had with Vladimir Putin or not, goodness only knows. But it made me think that they're always talking about the Europeans having to stand on their own 2 feet. What it is in Europe that we've got that might be able to do the same job. And surprisingly, we do have our homegrown stuff. There's a thing called the SAMP-T, that's SAMP-T, which is a joint French-Italian system, which obviously produced it. They've already licensed them to Ukraine, and they're more advanced than the Patriot systems, but they just haven't got the capacity at the moment to turn them out. They reckon that the output is going to be 300 per annum by 2028. And the Ukrainians are looking at something between 1,200 and 2,000 per annum that they're going to need if strikes go on at the same level. That unless they can ramp up production quite significantly, and there's a sea change. These things always interest me in the sense that I can't imagine during the Second World War, because we were well unprepared for the Second World War when it came about. We turned everything that we had over to production of munitions when we were fighting the Second World War in this country. And I find it difficult to believe that we would have been saying at the time, oh, no, I know we've got the Germans to fight and what have you, but this isn't going to be ready until 1948. But this isn't going to happen. Presumably would have just got on with it and done it as quickly as possible, as I'm sure the Ukrainians will themselves. But I do wonder about the European will. We've had this conversation before, haven't we? The European will as to whether it's there and whether they realise the threat that they're facing as a continent in terms of what the Russians are up to. On a brighter note, there is also a European project called Freya. Have you heard of Freya?
No.
Freya are producing a much cheaper to produce an advanced system that they reckon will be ready by 2027. And from the outset, they'll be producing 2,000 units a year, which obviously would, which would cut there. And instead of costing 3 let me get the figures right. Instead of costing $3,800 per unit that goes up, these are $700. So they cut the cost quite significantly. So that, when it comes into operation, presumably gets the go ahead in for 2027, will solve the problem for Ukraine. So this is only a year away, effectively.
And whose system is that?
System.
Did you say Freya?
A 10-country consortium, pan-European.
Okay.
Britain is involved through Thales. Have you heard of Thales? Who are
I have.
THALES.
Yeah.
They're part of this. They're all, again, it's the equivalent. In terms of software, we have open source software. It's the equivalent of open source software amongst the European allies, in that anybody can use it, and they've allowed the Ukrainians to use it. All 10 of these countries that are involved in production can manufacture these things when they come online. So that's looking very promising. That that looks hopeful, and we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, I'm not sure what the Ukrainians can do. Have you given this any thought?
Yeah, well, yeah, I was looking at it yesterday, and they were also saying that the most recent missiles were North Korean. So, because you think, there must be a capacity to, just as there's a capacity issue producing the defense systems, there's obviously a capacity issue producing the missiles. Well, the North Koreans, their missiles were known as unreliable. The Russians have improved them, and they're now firing North Korean missiles. But the question is, how many and for how long? I think it must be, I don't know what it feels like going to bed in Ukraine.
No.
And you know that it could be you, next time. And the missiles are clearly aimed to terrorize people. Zelensky said yesterday he's really worried about getting through the winter because, that's always tougher, isn't it? Particularly with the cold over there. But I guess if this system can come on board next year and it works, that would at least be the answer to part of their problems.
Yeah.
You still get the wider conflict going on, of course. And Ukraine have upped their game, haven't they? They're attacking, let's get this right, wild berries, which is the Amazon equivalent over there. They're using drones because they're not defended, so they're attacking the warehouses all over the country. The military reason is that I reckon they are supplying military logistics. So that's the justification for doing it, which is, you may or may not believe that. But then there's obviously the economic strategy behind that as well. And
it's a psychological thing, isn't it, with the Russian population in terms of...
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
I mean, it's quite astonishing, the idea that, it's quite astonishing the idea that according to the Ukrainians, Russian soldiers on the front line can get their spare parts quicker from their equivalent of Amazon than getting it through the chain. Which I'm not sure I swallow that. I'm not sure how you'd get a delivery up to the front line from an Amazon equivalent.
Me neither. But certainly the strategy of attacking wild berries has a lot of benefits. It's economic, military. It's a sort of a sanction in another way. As you said, it brings home the war to the Russians. And if Russia says, if Putin says, or the generals say these sites are worth defending, then obviously it diverts resource and capacity. So it's a smart strategy, as is the other things they do. And we discussed that the previous week. They're quite adept at using their drone capability they've got now to cause havoc. It's still, we have to remember that the Russian people, the ordinary citizens, we don't want them dying any more than we do Ukrainians.
No.
Even though they're the aggressors, but they probably didn't have much of a say in it.
No. I suppose there's other things to take into consideration here. It tells you something, really, that the Russians are reliant upon using North Korean weapons for starters, doesn't it? I mean, that in itself shows that their production isn't not keeping up with demand.
Yep.
I would contend. Whether there's any, there's brotherly love between the two nations now, between Putin and Kim Jong-un, isn't there? And in the sense that they've offered to provide more soldiers to fight on the front line.
Because they had 10,000 troops. They were
I'm not
involved
sure.
in resolving that incursion, weren't they? Because do you remember
into
when?
Kursk, wasn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It, I I suppose that's what comes of being a nation that's run by a dictator where there's no free will. But I'm guessing what that's again. It'd be interesting to see how this pans out. I'm guessing that's what's allowing Putin to prevent another conscription, which is what all the analysts seem to think will then hit. The next conscription would hit the middle classes around St. Petersburg and Moscow, which he's tried to avoid so far to try and keep the the bulk of the middle class on board with what's going on. It's a horrendous position, isn't it? I mean, you take the cynic's point of view, you wonder why Trump is being daft, not playing ball. If the truth of it is that they haven't got sufficient there for themselves and they're making that public, surely this would be a perfect time for President Xi to make his move on Taiwan, wouldn't it? At the end of the day,
probably would. But the bit about not allowing Ukraine to license that has a horrible smell about it. Because, as you say, that follows a recent conversation with Putin, maybe, and you wonder what the deal is.